Hi there, I'm Matt. Welcome to another episode of Cathrocasts, and this time it's another episode for Hammerfeller's Home, a name that I'm going to have to change because it's dull as. But there's been several short episodes now on character creation for a new character in Skyrim called Cade, and the whole video series has been looking at how we go from initial character development in Skyrim or any role-playing game of any sort really into playing, and I've extended this out more than I ever usually would because of the fact that I'm just talking through this video for other people to watch. I'm not an expert in any way, this is just something that I've done and the way that I do it, and it's been really enjoyable. So this is the final cast, I think, before I move into a new area, which will be the mods that I'm going to use in the game to A, make me want to come back every week and play it, and B, make the game more immersive with the focus on a sword and shield character who is a red god. So I will be looked a little bit into that in future episodes, and then after that I know that I want to get in and play the game. There's just a few things I need to get sorted, but for today's episode I wanted to talk about the almost their completion of Cade's timeline and the fun that kind of came in this once I'd found out that Google Sheets was a really versatile document that didn't chug away on me when I was working with it, unlike sadly Microsoft Excel. So from this I've been able to create Cade's background, and I've gone above and beyond the way I would normally. If I was doing this on my own, I may have stopped at who is the ancestor that's driving Cade to go on this journey and leave it at that, rather than this insane family tree right from the late or mid first era, I should say. Actually, it's early first era, all the way through to the fourth era, which is the era of Skyrim. What's been great about this, and of course this is partly why I did it, is I've learned a bit more about the world of Tamriel, Nirn, and certainly a lot more about the Red Gods. If I go and play Elder Scrolls Online now, I know that when I go to Hammerfell, I already know quite a lot of new things that I'm really interested in. So yeah, they're kind of, that's where I've got to at the moment. And so I thought for this episode I would quickly talk you through why is it that Cade is going to Skyrim, a little bit about Cade again, and about his ancestry. So I knew right in episode 1 that Cade had inherited a gift for fighting from his great generations beyond grandmother, and that is Safia. And what I was able to do was read around the Red God people and found that they are naturally extremely good at fighting techniques. I think there seems to be a really interesting mix in the Tamriel kind of Elder Scrolls world, where they are Eastern in some respects, and then not in others. But this whole idea that they're very good at sword fighting, not at the martial arts as such, but certain ways of fighting, seemed to lend itself to that scope, that kind of area. And yet, lots of pictures of them show them slightly Middle Eastern, African in origin. So there's obviously a mix. Obviously it's a fantasy world, so it's their own thing, but it was interesting to wonder where they're coming from and what cultures they've picked on to generate this people. So what happened was Safia came over when the island of Yakuda was destroyed. We don't know why it was destroyed, no one really seems to know, but she came over and she brought with her a great talent for fighting. If you go to the Skyrim wiki, and you type in Frandor Hunding, you will find a great story about this incredible warrior who went away like a hermit for many years to refine his sword fighting technique. It's a great story. But Safia, I decided, one of Kay's ancestors, did very much the same. And it was weird that a long time ago I decided that she'd written a scroll. I've called it here a codex, the Scroll of Safia, which is based on a fighting technique. And blow me if Frandor Hunding had already done that. So when I was writing it yesterday, I was like, right, great. So I've come up with an idea that has already been created. But it's fine. It actually makes sense lore-wise that someone else was writing fighting techniques. And so what I've decided is that Cade is going to Skyrim to retrieve this scroll. Now, what that means is it leaves an interesting idea about, well, why is it in Skyrim? How did it ever get there? And last night I was mulling over this because we've got to do a lot on the why. And if we come to the fourth era, Cade's background, you can see that I have a lot of, well, why is it that these things are happening? So I've decided, very late last night, I decided that it was taken by a Thalmor kind of thief or infiltrator of some kind who want to exact revenge on the Red Guards and are trying to actually find Frandor Hunding's writings on sword fighting, because it said that you're unbeatable if you know them. But instead they found Safia's, and so they took that. And they also took something else of one of Cade's ancestors, which we're going to look at later on. So I now know that Cade is going to retrieve that scroll back. Now the other thing is, I noticed that Cade is, I worked out, didn't I, early on, that I wanted Cade to be older. So I said he's about the age of 37. So I also worked out that why is he going so late in his life? Why didn't he go earlier on? And I have an idea for that, and that is based on the idea of these factions. So if you remember, very early on, I think in the very first cast of this series, we were looking at the fact that there are crowns and there are forebears, and the crowns are, I think, a little bit more loyal to tradition. No, they're more loyal to the Imperials. Oh, I can't remember. We'll have to go and read. Needless to say, there are two opposing factions within the Red Guard people. The Forebears came first. They won over Hammerfell from the Beast people. I feel quite bad about this actually, because that involves obviously the Khajiit and the other races. But they took over that land and cleared the way for the Notandambus people to come over. So there has always been a bit of a friction between the factions, but when the Old Mary began attacking, they united. Well, now that the Old Mary really aren't attacking anymore, and there has been a peace treaty that says we'll leave the Red Guards alone in Hammerfell then, this is what the elves have been saying, the Thalmor, the factions have gone back to fighting again. And so Cade has decided that in order to unite them once more, maybe they need some heritage, some commonality that will bring them together. And he's decided that maybe it will be this fighting technique of Safia's that, you know, can be taught, the stories that might come out from within this book that can bring the people back together. So those are the things that have led to Cade going to Skyrim. And now it's great, because I've got an idea of why I want him to go to Skyrim. He's got a quest that he needs to go on, you know, this is generally what happens, and he's got a reason to return. And that's an interesting element too, because we have several types of stories that we tell, and the voyage and return is a really famous one, you know, the Odyssey being a great example. So I like this idea of Cade heading over to find something and then bring it back to reunite his people. So as I was coming up with these stories and filling in the family tree, I was at the same time adding little elements in to gain a better understanding of the family. And I will leave these here for you to read. I'm really sorry, I've looked at this map on a laptop and noticed that its size and the format it's presented in shifts with whatever you're on. I should have known that anyway, but if you just go to view and then pull it down to, or here, and pull it down to the size that's comfortable for you, you can probably see it. I'm going to keep building on this because I enjoy knowing that I can hover over these characters, look at what they look like, and play with them. But the other thing that's quite nice was finding a little bit more about specifically about some of the characters. You can see that some of the timelines have got nothing in them at all, and that's because I haven't really read about those eras yet. I'm fully intend to gain a better understanding of Tamriel, Nirn / all of those elements. But there are a few eras that did come out as important, and one was in the Second Era, and this is a story I read yesterday about Cyrus, which is based on the Elder Scrolls. Now I don't know if it will come up here. There it is. This was a great story. I didn't read it here actually, I read it in a different wiki, but I found out about Cyrus the Red God, which is obviously from the, I'm guessing, the Red Gods, and he was from an opposing faction. Actually, I'm sure I read that he changed factions partway through because of his sister. Anyhow, it was a great way to pull in the lore of Skyrim and write a little bit of a story around that. And this is when one of Kay's ancestors, Gorion, lost the sword that had been passed down to him. I can't remember if I'd said that this was a sword that belonged to Safia. I think I probably did. And it was lost in a fight with a red dragon. Now, it's great hearing that even in the Second Era there were dragons. Apparently there's rumours that they came from the east and came over, which is quite interesting. But this idea came about in finding a mod of a weapon that I really liked, and I thought it would be great if Cade knew this story, knew about the sword being lost. I've decided as the writer that when Gorion was eaten by the dragon, the sword remained in the dragon, and basically the dragon has pooped it somewhere, and then was eventually killed by Cyrus. So the sword has been pooped basically somewhere in Skyrim. Now I know where it is because the mod tells us where it is, but what was great and a resolution I came to just a few nights ago was that Cade is not going to go on a quest for this sword. If I happen to find it in game, that's great, and it might be that I weave the story that he comes across it and then he goes, oh my goodness, I think I know what this sword is because I've read stories about this, I've seen images of this, I can't believe it, I'm going to take it back. And it's important that I do it that way because I was trying to force a reason as to why he would go to where the sword is placed, and I found that immediately I didn't want to play the game. I just thought, no, it's going to get boring, I'm forcing the story. So I moved away from that and just thought I'll plonk it in there, and even if I forget, it's absolutely fine. But really that leads to some of the things that came then from all of this planning. I have been slowly building in main parts of stories from each timeline, based on the IGN timeline that's been available. But really, I wanted to focus more on just Cade's element. So there's some facts here about Cade, and I left them here because I kept coming back and looking at the relationship between Cade's life now and why he's drawn to Skyrim. But the best tab for you to look at is probably this one, because this is the one that will end up growing. These will be my note-taking tabs that you can see and look at as we tell a story. So some of these are interesting, but the main one is this idea of him looking for the Scroll of Safia. If that's what it's probably going to have a better name than that. But also things like Cade has an absolute mistrust and hate for the Thalmor, and I was unsure about whether I'd do that. So at the moment, something that's quite appealing to me in playing the game is whenever Cade sees a Thalmor, I think he's going to kill them immediately. There'll be like some sort of bloodlust that resides in him, even though there's been a peace treaty. He's lost so many of his relatives in battles to them that I think he might just see red and go for it. And I quite like the idea of breaking that kind of game rule. You know, it'll be interesting when he goes to Solitude. Is it Solitude? It's not, is it? There's one city that has a ton of Thalmor in, and it'll be very interesting to see as a player whether I just let Cade go for it and he dies, or whether he's a bit more reserved about why he and how he's going to do that. I also know where the scroll is, and there'll be a note that Cade gets right at the beginning of the game that tells him, but it's a very difficult place to get to. So thank goodness for the Skyrim community for kind of leading hints towards quests that kind of allowed for me to come up with that idea. And then there's also a shield. I thought it would be really nice for him to find a sword and a shield, and I don't think I found out how he knows about the shield, but again, it was a Thalmor that stole the shield, and I'll explain how and why I chose that shield in a different session. So really, you know, feel free to read through these short, brief overviews of Cade's background, and then these will keep being updated. I do hope you kind of get some enjoyment from looking at them. There's little symbols that will keep coming in, these little legends. So swords mean they were in a war. Crows mean that they died during that war in some way. And that's been great. The other thing that's been really helpful is starting to create this mod list, which you can interact with in order for me to move into a new session and find it enjoyable and a new experience. Interestingly, on a modding community, lots of people write, has anyone installed a ton of mods on Skyrim and then not play it? There's a lot of truth in that, to be honest, because it's that excitement about building up a world and then deciding that actually you don't really want to go into that world. And I think what they might be missing is this idea as a purpose beyond just aesthetics, and I think the story is the key. So what I've done here is I've made several tabs that will hopefully have grown exponentially by the next cast, but you can see here that this is one of the mods that I've been looking at. So this one is Sword of the First Ember, and this looks like a great little mod. It's a really simple mod, so thanks N7R for making it. Simple as in the effects of the sword, or simple, and it will even tell you, if you want to read it, where that sword's going to be found. And then the other one is Azura's Shield, and that's another beautiful mod to look at. And again, I want to think of the story around why a member of Cade's family would have this shield, how they inherited it in some way. But the other ones I've separated in different ways. So I've got literature and lore. People that have watched any of my casts know that I'm a huge fan of reading around the literature. So I've put those in. This will grow. And then I talked a little bit about the interface. And then as we scroll through, you can see I've also talked about the landscape and the environment and the elements that I've chosen there too. And that's really it. I'll go into more depth about these different mods at a different time. I know people like videos about mods, and I won't be as good as some of the other casts out there, but I can certainly talk you through the choices that I've made and why I've made them, if I think they're going to be relevant to Cade's background. So that's really it. We've got a purpose for Cade going to Skyrim now. We've got some of the things that he can find there, but it's important that they don't control too much of the story. And the other thing is looking at some elements that make the game interesting in terms of the coding aspect. So placing things in the game that can keep that story ticking over. And that was a really exciting part of what I learned from playing the Cathra story. So hopefully you got something to take away from the session, and I look forward to seeing you in another cast. Thank you so much for your time.